No one wanted to play with the billionaire's blind son until a 7-year-old poor girl revealed the truth, leaving everyone shocked. This story will break your heart. Before we share this story, press like and write where you're watching from and a memory that still warms your heart. The screaming started at 3:47 a.m., just like every night for the past 3 years. 7-year-old Benjamin Crawford sat bolt upright in his silk-sheeted bed, his small hands clutching the darkness that had become his permanent companion. Down the marble hallway of the Crawford mansion, he could hear his father Richard's voice cracking with the same desperate words. "Sarah, please come back. I'm sorry." Benjamin's milky blue eyes stared at nothing as tears rolled down his pale cheeks. He knew Daddy was having the nightmare again, the one about Mommy's car accident. The one that happened because of him. "Master Benjamin!" Mrs. Eleanor, the elderly housekeeper, appeared in his doorway, her voice gentle but tired. She'd been the only constant in his life since that horrible day 3 years ago when everything changed. "Is Daddy crying again?" Benjamin whispered, his small voice barely audible. Eleanor's heart shattered as she watched the boy who had everything money could buy, yet nothing his soul truly needed. "He'll be okay, sweetheart. How about some warm milk?" But Benjamin wasn't okay, and neither was his father. Richard Crawford, once Dallas's most ruthless billionaire real estate mogul, had become a broken shell of a man. The accident that took his beloved wife Sarah's life had also stolen his son's sight, and with it any hope Richard had of redemption. The next morning brought the same routine. Benjamin would feel his way to the breakfast table where gourmet meals sat untouched. His father would mumble a distracted goodbye before disappearing into his office, drowning himself in work to escape the guilt that consumed him. "Today's your first day at Riverside Elementary," Eleanor announced, her voice forced with cheer. "Your father enrolled you in the regular classes." Benjamin's small shoulders tensed. He'd been homeschooled since the accident, protected in the sterile safety of the mansion. The thought of being around other children terrified him more than the darkness behind his eyes. What Benjamin didn't know was that across town, in a cramped apartment above Martinez grocery store, 7-year-old Isabella Martinez was facing her own first-day fears. Her calloused hands smoothed down her only school dress, a faded yellow hand-me-down from her older sister. Her mother, Maria, worked 3 jobs just to keep food on their table, but Isabella never complained. She had something Benjamin's billions couldn't buy, a heart full of hope. As the school bus pulled up to Riverside Elementary, Benjamin clutched Mrs. Eleanor's hand. "What if they don't like me?" he whispered. "Oh, my sweet boy." Eleanor knelt down, her weathered hands cupping his face. "Anyone would be lucky to be your friend." But she was wrong. The moment Benjamin walked into Mrs. Patterson's second-grade classroom, guided by his white cane, the whispers started. "That's the blind kid," someone hissed. "His dad's super rich, but look at him, he can't even see." Benjamin found an empty desk in the back corner and sat down, his small frame seeming even tinier, surrounded by the curious and sometimes cruel stares of his classmates. "Class, we have a new student joining us," Mrs. Patterson announced with forced enthusiasm. "This is Benjamin Crawford. I want everyone to make him feel welcome." The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin could hear the shuffling of feet, the whispered conversations, but no one spoke to him. During recess, he sat alone on a bench while other children played, their laughter echoing like a reminder of everything he couldn't be part of. "Why is he just sitting there?" A boy named Tommy whispered loudly enough for Benjamin to hear. "My mum says rich people think they're better than us." "Maybe he's stuck up," another voice added. "My dad works construction for his dad's company, says Mr. Crawford is mean and fires people for no reason." Benjamin's small hands clenched into fists. He wanted to tell them his father wasn't mean, he was just broken, that the money couldn't fix what was really wrong, but the words wouldn't come. From across the playground, Isabella Martinez watched the lonely boy with growing concern. She'd noticed how the other kids avoided him, how his shoulders slumped with each passing hour. Her grandmother had always taught her to see with her heart, not just her eyes. During lunch, Isabella made her decision. She approached Benjamin's table where he sat alone, carefully feeling for his sandwich. "Hi," she said softly, sitting down across from him. "I'm Isabella. Can I eat lunch with you?" Benjamin's head snapped up, surprise evident on his face. You want to sit with me? Of course. I don't know anyone here either." Isabella unwrapped her simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich, noting how Benjamin's expensive bento box sat mostly untouched. "Are you okay? You seem sad." For the first time in years, someone was asking Benjamin about his feelings, not his condition. "I can't see," he whispered, as if confessing a terrible secret. "I know," Isabella said matter-of-factly, "but you can hear me, right? And you can talk. That's all we need to be friends." Benjamin felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt since before the accident. Hope. Want to know a secret? Isabella leaned closer, her voice conspiratorial. "I think being able to see sometimes makes people miss the important stuff. Like, I bet you notice things we don't." "Like what?" Benjamin asked, genuinely curious. "Well, you probably know Mrs. Patterson is nervous because her coffee cup keeps clinking when she sets it down. And Tommy Harrison is scared because his voice gets higher when he talks to new people." Benjamin's mouth fell open. She was right. He had noticed these things. "How did you know I noticed that?" Isabella smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Because you're smart. I can tell by how you listen." For the first time in 3 years, Benjamin smiled back. Word of Isabella's friendship with the rich blind boy spread quickly through the school. By the next day, she was facing her own social challenges. "Why are you hanging out with him?" demanded Chloe, the self-appointed queen of second grade. "He's weird, and his family probably looks down on people like us." Isabella stood straighter, her dark eyes flashing with determination. "Benjamin is my friend, and he's not weird. He's lonely. My mom says his dad destroyed our old neighborhood to build fancy condos." Another girl chimed in. "Maybe you shouldn't trust rich people." But Isabella had seen something others missed. During art class, when Mrs. Patterson asked everyone to draw their family, Benjamin had sat with his crayons, tears streaming down his face. "I can't draw what I can't see," he'd whispered to Isabella. Without hesitation, she'd taken his hands and placed them over her paper. "Feel this," she'd said, guiding his fingers over her drawing. "This is how I drew my mom's smile, and here's my little brother's messy hair." Then she'd helped Benjamin create his own drawing, not with his eyes, but with his memories and Isabella's patient guidance. Together, they'd crafted a beautiful picture of a woman with kind eyes and flowing hair. "That's my mommy," Benjamin had whispered. "Before the accident." Isabella had squeezed his hand gently. "She's beautiful. I bet she's proud of you." Now, watching Benjamin eat lunch alone again while she faced pressure from other kids, Isabella made a choice. She walked directly to his table, ignoring the stares and whispers. "Benjamin," she said firmly, "want to be partners for the science project?" His face lit up like sunrise. "Really, you'd want to work with me?" "Of course. You're the smartest person in our class." From across the cafeteria, Mrs. Patterson watched this exchange with growing interest. She'd taught for 15 years, but she'd never seen a child show such natural kindness and wisdom. That afternoon, as Benjamin waited for Mrs. Eleanor to pick him up, Isabella approached him one more time. "Benjamin, can I ask you something personal?" He nodded, trust evident in his expression. "How did you lose your sight?" "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. No one had ever asked him directly. Adults always talked around it in hushed tones when they thought he couldn't hear. "There was a car accident," he said finally. "My mommy died and I got hurt. The doctors said something about my brain and my eyes. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. It was my fault. Isabella's heart clenched. What do you mean it was your fault? I was being bad in the car. I was crying and screaming because I wanted ice cream. Mommy turned around to calm me down, and his small shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. If I hadn't been bad, Mommy would still be alive and I could still see. Isabella felt tears sting her own eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and hugged Benjamin tightly. That wasn't your fault, she said fiercely. Accidents happen. Your mommy wouldn't want you to blame yourself. For the first time since that horrible day 3 years ago, Benjamin let himself truly cry. Not the silent tears of guilt and shame, but the deep, cleansing sobs of a child finally able to grieve. The friendship between Isabella and Benjamin didn't go unnoticed by the adults in their lives. Mrs. Eleanor watched through the kitchen window as Isabella walked Benjamin around the mansion's gardens, describing every flower, every butterfly, every cloud formation with vivid detail. She's good for him, Eleanor murmured to herself, remembering how Benjamin had laughed, actually laughed, at something Isabella had whispered during their garden walk. But Richard Crawford was less receptive when Mrs. Eleanor suggested he meet Isabella's family. Absolutely not, he said sharply, not looking up from his laptop. Benjamin doesn't need distractions. His therapists say he needs structure, routine. Mr. Crawford, Eleanor said carefully, with all due respect, Benjamin has been more alive these past 2 weeks than he's been in 3 years. This little girl is helping him heal. Richard's jaw tightened. Heal? Eleanor, my son is blind. He's never going to be normal. The kindest thing I can do is protect him from disappointment. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she knew better than to push Richard when his guilt was talking. Still, she couldn't ignore the transformation she'd witnessed. Benjamin was eating better, sleeping through the night, and most importantly, he'd stopped saying it was his fault. Meanwhile, at the Martinez apartment, Isabella was facing her own family discussions. "Mija, you need to be careful," her mother Maria warned gently. "Rich people, they're different. They might decide you're not good enough for their son." "But Mama, Benjamin isn't like that. He's just lonely and sad." Maria sighed, remembering her own encounters with wealthy employers who'd treated her as invisible. "I know you have a good heart, Isabella. Just protect it, okay?" That weekend, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She asked her mother if she could invite Benjamin to her birthday party, a simple celebration in their small apartment with homemade cake and dollar store decorations. "Are you sure his family will let him come?" Maria asked doubtfully. "I don't know," Isabella admitted, "but I want him to know he's invited." On Monday, Isabella approached Benjamin with nervous excitement. "My birthday is this Saturday. Would you like to come to my party? It's not fancy. We live above my family's grocery store, but we'll have cake and games, and my abuela makes the best tamales in Texas." Benjamin's face went through a series of emotions, surprise, joy, then crushing disappointment. I don't think my daddy will let me." "Why not?" Benjamin struggled with words too complex for his 7-year-old vocabulary. How could he explain that his father wrapped him in protective isolation, that venturing into the real world was seen as dangerous? "He thinks I might get hurt," Benjamin said finally. Isabella was quiet for a moment, then her chin lifted with determination. "What if I asked him myself?" "You'd do that?" Benjamin's voice was filled with wonder. "Of course. What's the worst he could say?" Benjamin almost smiled at her innocent confidence. She had no idea what the worst could be. That afternoon, Isabella did something that would later be remembered as either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. She marched up to the Blacktown car, waiting to pick up Benjamin, knocked on the passenger window, and introduced herself to Mrs. Eleanor. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm Isabella Martinez, Benjamin's friend. Could I please speak to Mr. Crawford about my birthday party?" Eleanor's eyes widened in shock and admiration. "Oh, sweetheart, Mr. Crawford isn't here. He's at work. But maybe we could arrange—" "Could you give him my address?" Isabella interrupted politely. "I'll be home after school every day this week if he wants to come meet my family." As the car drove away, Benjamin clutched Isabella's hand. "What did you just do?" "I invited your daddy to meet my mama," Isabella said simply. "If he sees that I'm good people, maybe he'll let you come to my party." Benjamin felt that familiar flutter of hope mixed with terror. No one had ever fought for his friendship before. Richard Crawford stared at the handwritten note Mrs. Eleanor had placed on his desk. The childish handwriting spelled out an address in East Dallas, a part of the city he'd helped gentrify but never actually visited. "She seems like a lovely child," Eleanor said carefully, "and Benjamin talks about her constantly." "Absolutely not." Richard's response was immediate and sharp. "I'm not dragging my son to some stranger's apartment." "What if he gets hurt? What if there are stairs he can't navigate? What if he has fun?" Eleanor interrupted, something she'd never dared do in 3 years of employment. "Sir, when was the last time you saw your son truly happy?" Richard's face darkened. "Happiness is a luxury Benjamin can't afford. The world is cruel to people like him. I won't set him up for heartbreak." But Eleanor had planted a seed of doubt. That evening, Richard found himself standing outside Benjamin's bedroom door, listening to his son talk to himself. "I wonder what Isabella's house looks like," Benjamin was saying to his stuffed elephant. "I bet it smells like cooking and sounds like a real family, not like here where everything is quiet and sad." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Was that how his son saw their home? As sad and quiet? The next morning brought an unexpected phone call to Crawford Industries. "Mr. Crawford, this is Maria Martinez, Isabella's mother. I hope you don't mind me calling your office." Richard tensed immediately. "Mrs. Martinez, if this is about money—" "No, sir." Maria's voice was calm but firm. "It's about our children. My Isabella hasn't stopped talking about your son. She thinks he hung the moon and stars." "I see." Richard's tone remained guarded. "Sir, I know we come from different worlds, but children don't see money or status. They see hearts, and my Isabella sees something special in Benjamin." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Martinez, you have to understand. My son is vulnerable. He's been through trauma that—" "So is mine," Maria interrupted gently. "Her father left when she was 4. We've struggled, moved 6 times in 3 years, but she still believes in the goodness of people. Maybe that's exactly what Benjamin needs." That afternoon, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He left work early and drove to East Dallas, to the address on Isabella's note. Martinez grocery store was a small, colorful building with hand-painted signs in Spanish and English. Through the window, he could see a woman, presumably Maria, helping customers with warm smiles and easy conversation. Richard sat in his car for 20 minutes, working up the courage to go inside. Finally, shame at his own cowardice forced him out. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. Maria looked up from the register, and her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the expensive suit and obvious discomfort of her visitor. "Mr. Crawford?" she asked. He nodded stiffly. "Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to meet you." Isabella appeared from behind a display of canned goods, her face lighting up with pure joy. "Mr. Crawford, you came. Does this mean Benjamin can come to my party?" Richard looked down at this small girl who had somehow become the center of his son's world. She was thin, clearly poor, but her smile was radiant with genuine happiness. "I wanted to see," he began, then stopped, unsure how to voice his protective concerns without sounding insulting. "You wanted to see if we're good enough for your son," Maria said with understanding rather than anger. "That's what any parent would do." Richard's defensive walls cracked slightly. "Benjamin has been hurt enough. I can't risk—" "Mr. Crawford," Isabella interrupted, stepping closer with the fearless confidence of childhood. "Benjamin told me about the accident, about his mommy, but he also told me how you cry at night because you miss her too." Richard's breath caught in his throat. His son had shared this? "He thinks you don't love him anymore because he can't see. But I told him that's silly. Daddies always love their children, even when they're scared." The truth of it hit Richard like a sledgehammer. In trying to protect Benjamin from the world, he'd been protecting himself from more pain and pushing away the one person who needed him most. Saturday morning arrived with Isabella's infectious excitement filling the small apartment above Martinez's grocery store. She'd spent the entire week preparing for her party, making decorations from construction paper and helping her mother bake a chocolate cake from scratch. But by noon, she was sitting by the window, watching the street with growing disappointment. Benjamin hadn't come. Neither had any of the other children from school who'd received invitations. "Mija," Maria said gently, sitting beside her daughter. "Maybe Benjamin's father said no." Isabella's shoulders sagged. I hoped after he came to the store that maybe." Just then, a black town car pulled up outside. Isabella's heart leaped as she watched Mrs. Eleanor get out, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit, and finally, Benjamin. "He came!" Isabella shrieked, racing down the stairs and out the front door. Benjamin stood on the sidewalk, his white cane in one hand and a beautifully wrapped present in the other. His face was a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "Isabella!" he called out. "I'm right here." She grabbed his free hand, and he beamed with relief. Richard watched this interaction with carefully guarded emotions. The building was indeed small and worn, nothing like the pristine environment he tried to create for Benjamin. But as Isabella led his son up the narrow stairs, chattering excitedly about all the things she'd planned, Richard saw something he hadn't witnessed in 3 years. Benjamin was animated, engaged, truly alive. The party was everything Isabella had promised, simple but filled with love. Maria had invited several neighbors, creating a warm, multi-generational gathering. Benjamin was passed from person to person, each treating him not as a fragile invalid, but as an honored guest. "Benjamin, you must try my abuela's tamales," Isabella insisted, carefully guiding his hands to his plate. As Benjamin bit into the homemade food, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "This is amazing. It tastes like happiness." The room erupted in delighted laughter, and Richard felt something crack open in his chest. When was the last time his son had expressed joy about anything? Later, as the party wound down, Isabella opened her presents. She exclaimed over each small gift with such genuine gratitude that Richard felt ashamed of his own assumptions about what mattered to children. When she reached Benjamin's gift, an expensive electronic tablet loaded with audiobooks, her eyes went wide. "Benjamin, this is too much," she whispered. "My daddy helped me pick it," Benjamin said proudly. "It has stories you can listen to. I thought maybe we could listen together sometimes." Isabella threw her arms around Benjamin in a fierce hug. "It's perfect. You're the best friend anyone could have." Richard watched from the corner, seeing his son through Isabella's eyes. Not a burden to be protected, but a wonderful boy worthy of friendship and love. As they prepared to leave, Maria approached Richard. "Thank you," she said simply, "for letting him come. Isabella has talked about nothing else all week." "Thank you for inviting him," Richard replied, and meant it. "I haven't seen him this happy since." "Since before the accident?" Maria asked gently. Richard nodded, surprised by his own vulnerability. "I've been so afraid of him getting hurt again that I forgot. He's still just a little boy who needs friends." As they walked to the car, Benjamin chattering excitedly about every detail of the party, Mrs. Eleanor caught Richard's arm. "Sir, if I may, that little girl sees your son the way he deserves to be seen. Maybe it's time you did too." That night, for the first time in 3 years, The Crawford house didn't echo with Richard's nightmares. Instead, it was filled with Benjamin's laughter as he recounted every moment of Isabella's party. But neither Richard nor Benjamin knew that Isabella had made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden in an old box of her grandmother's belongings, she'd found something that would reveal the truth about Benjamin's accident and prove that sometimes a child's pure heart can see what adults miss entirely. The real story was just beginning. 3 weeks after Isabella's birthday party, she sat in her grandmother's attic helping sort through old belongings. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight as she carefully lifted yellowed photographs and faded documents from a weathered wooden box. "Abuela, what's this?" Isabella held up a manila folder marked Martinez Family Legal Documents, 2018. Her grandmother Rosa's weathered hands trembled slightly as she recognized the folder. "Ay, mija, that's from when your grandfather got hurt at work, before he passed." Isabella opened the folder with innocent curiosity, not expecting to find anything important. But there, clipped to the front of a stack of papers, was a newspaper clipping that made her heart stop. "Construction accident. Kills beloved teacher, injures young son," read the headline. Below it was a photograph that made Isabella's blood run cold, a mangled intersection she recognized, and in smaller text, "Sarah Crawford, 31, was killed instantly when a cement truck ran a red light and struck her vehicle. Her 4-year-old son Benjamin sustained severe head injuries and is in critical condition." Isabella's hands shook as she read further. The cement truck belonged to Martinez Construction Company, her grandfather's company. The driver, Miguel Santos, had been working a double shift and fell asleep at the wheel. "Abuela," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible. This was Grandpa's truck. Rosa's face went pale as she saw what Isabella was holding. "Dios mío, I thought we threw all that away. The accident that hurt Benjamin, that killed his mother. It was because of our family." Rosa sank into an old chair, suddenly looking every one of her 78 years. "It wasn't your grandfather's fault, mija. Miguel was a good man who made a terrible mistake. But your grandfather, he blamed himself. It destroyed him." Isabella felt the world spinning around her. Benjamin's blindness, his mother's death, his father's guilt and overprotection, all of it traced back to her own family's tragedy. "Does Benjamin know?" she asked. "No, child. The Crawfords never pursued it in court. Mr. Crawford said no amount of money would bring his wife back or restore his son's sight. He just wanted Miguel to get help for his exhaustion." Isabella stared at the newspaper clipping, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. No wonder the other kids said Benjamin's father was cold to working-class families. No wonder Richard had been hesitant to let Benjamin visit their home. "What happened to Miguel?" Isabella asked quietly. "He couldn't live with what he did. He left Dallas, moved back to Mexico. Your grandfather sold the company and gave most of the money to families who lost someone in construction accidents. We kept just enough to buy the grocery store." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face. Benjamin had been carrying guilt for an accident that wasn't his fault, while her family had been carrying guilt for an accident that wasn't really their fault either. 2 families destroyed by one terrible moment of human error. "Abuela, I have to tell Benjamin the truth." "No, mija." Rosa gripped Isabella's arm urgently. "This would destroy your friendship. His father would never let you see Benjamin again." But Isabella's 7-year-old mind was already working. She understood something the adults had missed. Benjamin needed to know he wasn't responsible for his mother's death. And maybe, just maybe, the truth could finally free both families from their burden of guilt. That night, Isabella lay awake planning. She couldn't tell Benjamin directly. The shock might hurt him. But she could help him discover the truth in a way that would heal rather than harm. She had no idea that across town, Benjamin was having another sleepless night. but for a completely different reason. For the first time since the accident, he'd been having happy dreams about his mother. Dreams where she was proud of his friendship with Isabella. Dreams where she wasn't angry at him for causing the accident. Tomorrow would bring a revelation that would change everything for both children. Isabella had found the key to unlocking Benjamin's prison of guilt, but using it would require more courage than any 7-year-old should need. The truth was finally ready to come to light, but it would test the strength of their friendship in ways neither child could imagine. Isabella spent the entire next day at school watching Benjamin with new eyes. Every time he flinched at loud noises, every time he apologized unnecessarily, every time he spoke about being bad, she now understood the deeper trauma he was carrying. During art class, Mrs. Patterson announced a special project. Today we're going to research local heroes, people in our community who help others. You can choose anyone, firefighters, teachers, doctors, even family members. Isabella's hand shot up immediately. Mrs. Patterson, can we research people who help after accidents, like paramedics or police officers? Of course, Isabella. That's a wonderful idea. Benjamin, sitting beside her, perked up with interest. Could I help with that? I know about accidents. Perfect, Isabella said, her heart racing with nervous determination. We'll be partners. That afternoon, Isabella guided Benjamin to the school library with a carefully planned strategy. She'd convinced the librarian, Mrs. Chen, to help her access newspaper archives from around 2018 for their hero project. Let's look up paramedics and emergency responders, Isabella suggested, her voice carefully casual. Maybe we can find stories about people they saved. As Mrs. Chen pulled up digital newspaper archives on the computer, Isabella held her breath. She guided Benjamin to sit beside her, then began reading headlines aloud. Here's one about firefighters saving a family from a house fire, she said. And here's one about a paramedic who delivered a baby in an ambulance. She scrolled carefully, looking for the article she'd memorized from her grandmother's attic. Finally, there it was. Oh, here's an interesting one, Isabella said, her voice slightly strained. It's about how emergency responders work together to save a child in a car accident. Benjamin stiffened immediately. Isabella, maybe we should look at different stories. No, wait, Isabella pressed on, knowing this was her only chance. Listen to this, Benjamin. 4-year-old Benjamin Crawford was rushed to Children's Medical Center after a cement truck ran a red light and struck his family's vehicle. Dr. Maria Santos led the surgical team that saved the boy's life, though damage to his optical cortex resulted in complete vision loss. Benjamin's face went completely white. Isabella, stop, please. But Isabella continued reading, her voice growing stronger. The truck driver, Miguel Santos, was found to have been working excessive hours due to a labor shortage at Martinez Construction. No charges were filed as the Crawford family chose to focus on medical care rather than legal proceedings. Benjamin was breathing heavily now, his small hands clenched into fists. Why are you reading this to me? Isabella turned to face him fully, her own eyes bright with tears. Because, Benjamin, this says the truck driver fell asleep. It says he ran a red light. It doesn't say anything about you being bad in the car. But I was crying. I was being bad, and Mommy turned around. Benjamin, Isabella interrupted gently, taking his hands in hers. A truck ran a red light and hit your car. That's not your fault. A grown-up made a mistake because he was too tired. Your Mommy turning around didn't cause the accident. Benjamin's world seemed to tilt on its axis. For 3 years, he'd carried the crushing weight of believing his tantrum had killed his mother and stolen his sight. Now, faced with the actual facts, that weight began to crack and crumble. I don't understand, he whispered. Mrs. Chen, who had been listening with growing concern, gently intervened. Benjamin's sweetheart, accidents happen because of many factors. From what I'm reading here, A very tired driver made a terrible mistake. That's not your fault, and it's not your mother's fault either." Isabella squeezed Benjamin's hands tighter. "Your daddy probably never told you, because he didn't want you to be angry at the truck driver. But Benjamin, you didn't cause this. You were just a little boy who wanted ice cream." For the first time in 3 years, Benjamin began to understand that the voice in his head, the one that constantly told him he was bad, that he'd killed his mother, had been lying to him. "Does this mean—" He started, then stopped, afraid to voice the hope growing in his chest. "It means you're not responsible for what happened," Isabella said firmly. "It means your mummy wouldn't be angry at you. It means you're allowed to be happy." Benjamin broke down then, not with the silent tears of guilt he'd carried for years, but with the deep, shuddering sobs of a child finally beginning to heal. Isabella held him as he cried, knowing that this was just the beginning. Now came the harder part, helping Benjamin tell his father what they'd discovered, and somehow bringing healing to a family that had been broken by misplaced guilt. That evening, Benjamin sat at the dinner table with his father, the newspaper article folded carefully in his backpack upstairs. For the first time in 3 years, he looked directly toward where he knew his father was sitting. "Daddy," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something important." Richard looked up from his untouched meal, surprised by the seriousness in his son's voice. "What is it, Benjamin?" "The accident that hurt me. Was it really my fault?" Richard's fork clattered to his plate. "Benjamin, we've talked about this. You don't need to worry about—" "Please, Daddy, I need to know the truth." Richard's hands began to tremble. This was the conversation he'd dreaded for 3 years, the one he'd hoped to avoid forever. "Why are you asking this now?" "Isabella and I found a newspaper article at school. It said a truck driver fell asleep and ran a red light. It said you didn't press charges because you wanted to focus on helping me get better." The color drained from Richard's face. His carefully constructed protective walls were crumbling, and he felt completely unprepared. "Benjamin, Daddy, for 3 years I thought I killed Mommy. I thought when I was crying in the car, she turned around and that's why we crashed. I thought you couldn't love me anymore because I was bad." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the chest. His son had been carrying that burden. "Oh, Benjamin, no, that's not you didn't." "Then why didn't you tell me the truth?" Benjamin's voice was small but clear. "Why did you let me think it was my fault?" Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Because the truth doesn't change anything. You're still blind. Your mother is still gone, and I still failed to protect you both." "But Daddy, if it wasn't my fault, then maybe it wasn't your fault either." The simple wisdom of his 7-year-old son hit Richard like a revelation. For 3 years, he'd been so consumed with his own guilt. Guilt over working late that day, guilt over not picking them up himself, guilt over every decision that led to that moment, that he'd never considered how his withdrawal was affecting Benjamin. "I was supposed to protect you," Richard whispered, "both of you, and I failed." Benjamin stood up slowly, using his cane to navigate toward his father's voice. "Daddy, you didn't fail. Bad things just happened. Isabella says that sometimes bad things happen and it's nobody's fault." Richard turned to find his son standing directly in front of him, small hands reaching up. For the first time since the accident, Richard knelt down and pulled Benjamin into his arms. "I'm so sorry," Richard sobbed. "I'm so sorry I let you think it was your fault. I'm so sorry I've been hiding from you. I'm sorry too, Daddy. I'm sorry I couldn't save Mommy." "Benjamin, listen to me." Richard held his son's face in his hands. "You were 4 years old. You were not responsible for saving anyone. You were my little boy, and you still are. And I love you more than anything in this world." They held each other and cried, really cried, for the first time since Sarah's funeral. All the guilt, all the pain, all the love they'd been too afraid to express came pouring out. "Daddy," Benjamin said finally, "I want to thank Isabella for helping me find the truth. Can we do something special for her?" Richard pulled back, looking at his son with new eyes. The boy, who had seemed so fragile, so broken, was showing remarkable strength and wisdom. "What did you have in mind?" "Isabella's family doesn't have much money. Her mom works really hard, but they worry about paying bills. Maybe we could help them." Richard felt a surge of pride in his son's generous heart. "I think that's a wonderful idea. But Benjamin, we need to be careful about how we help. We want to make sure Isabella's family keeps their dignity." "What do you mean?" "We need to find a way to help that doesn't make them feel bad about accepting it. Like, maybe we could offer Isabella's mother a job, or help with her little brother's school expenses. Something that feels like an exchange, not charity." Benjamin nodded seriously. "Isabella always says her mom is the smartest person she knows. Maybe you could find her a good job." For the first time in years, Richard felt hope stirring in his chest. Maybe there was a way to heal, not just his relationship with Benjamin, but the ripple effects of that terrible day that had hurt so many people. "Let's talk to Isabella tomorrow," Richard said. "I think it's time I properly thanked her for being such a good friend to you." That night, both father and son slept peacefully for the first time in 3 years, no longer haunted by guilt they should never have carried. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Crawford mansion. Maria Martinez stood nervously at the front door, clutching a manila envelope and trying to summon the courage to ring the doorbell. Inside, Benjamin was excitedly telling his father about his plans to help Isabella's family, when Mrs. Eleanor announced they had a guest. "It's Mrs. Martinez, sir. She says she needs to speak with you urgently." Richard's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Send her in, please." Maria entered the elegant living room, clearly uncomfortable in the opulent surroundings. Her face was pale, and her hand shook slightly as she approached Richard. "Mr. Crawford, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I found something I think you need to see." Richard gestured for her to sit down. "What is it, Mrs. Martinez?" Maria opened the envelope and pulled out the same newspaper clipping Isabella had found, along with several other documents. "Yesterday, my mother told me that Isabella discovered some old papers in our attic. I went through everything last night, and I found—" She handed Richard the documents with trembling hands. "The construction company that owned the truck that hit your family. It belonged to my father." Richard's face went completely still as he processed this information. Benjamin, sensing the tension in the room, moved closer to his father. "The driver, Miguel Santos, was my father's employee," Maria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father sold the company afterward. He never got over the guilt. Neither did Miguel. He moved back to Mexico, and we never heard from him again." Richard stared at the papers, his mind reeling. "You're telling me that Isabella is related to—" "Her grandfather owned the truck," Maria confirmed. "Mr. Crawford, I had no idea when she became friends with Benjamin. She only discovered it yesterday. But when she told me what happened at school, how she helped Benjamin learn the truth—" "She knew," Richard said quietly. "Isabella knew about the connection, and she still helped Benjamin understand it wasn't his fault." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She said Benjamin needed to know the truth more than she needed to protect herself. She was afraid you'd never let her see him again once you found out." Benjamin, who had been listening with growing understanding, suddenly spoke up. "Mrs. Martinez, where is Isabella? Is she okay?" "She's at home, mijo. She's very scared. She thinks she's going to lose her best friend." Richard stood slowly, his business mind racing through implications while his father's heart struggled with conflicting emotions. The family of the man responsible for his wife's death had been caring for his son. The little girl who had brought Benjamin back to life was connected to his greatest tragedy. But as he looked at Maria's anguished face, so similar to his own expression for the past 3 years, he realized something profound. They were all victims of the same terrible accident. Miguel Santos, exhausted from working too many hours to support his family. Isabella's grandfather, destroyed by guilt over an employee's mistake. Maria's family, living with the knowledge of their connection to the tragedy. Mrs. Martinez, Richard said finally, does Isabella understand that Miguel Santos falling asleep wasn't her fault either? I don't know. She's 7 years old. She just knows our family was involved. Then we need to make sure she understands, Richard said firmly, just like Benjamin needed to understand it wasn't his fault. Benjamin's face lit up with relief. You're not angry at Isabella? Richard knelt down beside his son. Benjamin, Isabella could have kept this secret forever. Instead, she risked losing your friendship to help you find the truth. That tells me everything I need to know about her character. He turned to Maria. Mrs. Martinez, I'd like to meet your father if he's still alive. And I'd like to talk to Isabella. I think it's time we all stopped carrying guilt that doesn't belong to us. Maria's eyes widened in shock. You want to help us? I want to heal, Richard said simply. For 3 years, I've been so focused on the pain that I forgot about forgiveness. Isabella reminded Benjamin and me that accidents happen and they're nobody's fault. What about Miguel? Maria asked hesitantly. He's been living in isolation, unable to forgive himself. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Maybe it's time someone told him that we forgive him too. The revelation that should have destroyed their friendship was instead becoming the foundation for something much deeper. True healing that could finally free everyone touched by that terrible day. 2 hours later, the Crawford mansion was filled with an unlikely gathering. Isabella sat nervously on the edge of an expensive sofa, her mother beside her, while Benjamin held her hand tightly. Rosa, Isabella's grandmother, had been brought from the nursing home, her weathered hands clutching a rosary. Richard had spent the morning making phone calls, including one to a private investigator who specialized in locating people in Mexico. Now, he stood before this group of people whose lives had been forever intertwined by tragedy. Before we go any further, Richard began, I need everyone to understand something. What happened 3 years ago was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident, but an accident nonetheless. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. Mr. Crawford, I'm sorry about our truck hurting your family. Richard knelt down in front of Isabella, just as he had with Benjamin. Isabella, you were 4 years old when the accident happened. You didn't drive that truck. You didn't make Miguel Santos work extra hours. You are not responsible for what happened. But my grandpa's company. Your grandfather ran a construction business and employed people who needed work. Miguel Santos was trying to provide for his family. Sometimes, when people are exhausted, they make mistakes. That doesn't make your grandfather evil, and it doesn't make you guilty. Benjamin squeezed Isabella's hand. Isabella, you taught me that accidents happen, and it's nobody's fault. Remember? Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face. But what if you hate me now that you know? Isabella, Benjamin said with the fierce loyalty only children possess, you're my best friend. You helped me stop being scared and sad. Nothing will ever change that. Richard's phone rang, interrupting the emotional moment. He answered quickly, had a brief conversation in Spanish, then hung up with a strange expression on his face. That was my investigator, he said slowly. He found Miguel Santos. The room fell completely silent. Miguel has been living in a small village outside Guadalajara. He never remarried, never had children. He works at a church, doing maintenance and helping with charity work. According to the priest, he's been waiting for 3 years for God to forgive him. Rosa crossed herself and whispered a prayer in Spanish. Maria covered her face with her hands. I've arranged for a video call, Richard continued. Miguel deserves to know that we don't hate him. and I think we all deserve the chance to finally put this behind us." 30 minutes later, they were gathered around Richard's laptop as a grainy video connection established with a small church in Mexico. The face that appeared on screen was that of a broken man, Miguel Santos, thinner and older than in the employment photos they'd seen, his eyes haunted by 3 years of guilt. "Senor Crawford," Miguel's voice cracked through the computer speakers. "Miguel, I want you to see someone," Richard said, gently guiding Benjamin into view of the camera. Miguel's intake of breath was audible. "El Niño, the boy, he is." "I'm okay, Mr. Santos," Benjamin said clearly. "I can't see anymore, but I'm okay." "And I don't want you to be sad about what happened." Miguel began sobbing openly. "I'm so sorry, Niño, so very sorry." "I know," Benjamin said with wisdom beyond his years. "But it was an accident. My friend Isabella taught me that accidents aren't anybody's fault." Isabella appeared on camera next to Benjamin. "Mr. Santos, my name is Isabella. My grandpa was your boss. He was sad too, but he never blamed you." "Isabella," Miguel whispered, "you look like your grandfather." "He loved you," Rosa spoke up, moving into the camera's range. "Miguel, my husband Manuel never blamed you. He blamed himself for making you work too hard. He died carrying that guilt. Please don't let his sacrifice be for nothing." The conversation continued for another hour, with tears, forgiveness, and healing flowing through the video connection across international borders. Miguel learned that Benjamin was thriving, that he had friends, and was learning to navigate the world with confidence. Richard learned that Miguel had dedicated his life to helping others as a way of making amends. As the call ended, Richard made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Miguel, I'm starting a foundation in my wife Sarah's memory to help families affected by workplace accidents and to promote worker safety. I'd like you to help run the Mexican branch, if you're willing." Miguel's tears turned to sobs of relief and gratitude. For the first time in 3 years, he had a purpose beyond penance. After the call ended, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Isabella spoke up. "Mr. Crawford, does this mean we're all going to be okay now?" Richard smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in 3 years. "I think it means we're all going to be better than okay, Isabella. I think we're going to be a family." 1 year later, the Sarah Crawford Memorial Garden at Riverside Elementary was bustling with activity. It was the first anniversary of the foundation that had grown from that emotional video call with Miguel Santos, and the celebration was bringing together families whose lives had been touched by workplace accidents. Benjamin, now 8 and radiating confidence, was giving a tour to visitors, his guide dog Buddy, a gift from Isabella's family, walking proudly beside him. His voice was clear and strong as he explained each section of the garden. "This part has flowers that smell really strong, so people who can't see can still enjoy them," he was telling a group of children. "And over here we have a fountain that makes sounds to help people know where they are." Isabella, also 8 now and glowing with pride in her best friend, was helping her mother Maria coordinate the day's events. Maria had become the Foundation's Community Outreach Coordinator, a position that utilized her natural warmth and bilingual skills to help families navigate resources after workplace accidents. Richard stood watching his son, barely recognizable as the broken man he'd been a year ago. He'd lost 20 pounds, started smiling regularly, and had developed a reputation as one of Dallas's most compassionate employers. The foundation had already helped over 200 families, and Miguel Santos had become one of their most effective advocates in Mexico. "Mr. Crawford?" a voice called out. Richard turned to see Mrs. Patterson, Benjamin's former teacher, approaching with a newspaper. "Have you seen today's Dallas Morning News?" Richard took the paper and saw a large photograph of Benjamin and Isabella planting flowers in the memorial garden, with the headline, Young friendship blooms into citywide healing initiative. The article told the story of how two 7-year-old children had uncovered a truth that freed multiple families from years of misplaced guilt, and how their friendship had inspired a foundation that was changing lives across 2 countries. They want to do a feature story on Channel 8 News, Mrs. Patterson continued, about how children sometimes see solutions that adults miss. "What do you think, Benjamin?" Richard called out. Benjamin considered this seriously. "Will it help other kids who are carrying guilt that isn't theirs?" "It might," Richard replied. "Then yes, Isabella and I want to help." As the day progressed, Richard found himself in conversation with Father Jose, the priest from Miguel's church, who had flown in for the celebration. "You know, Senor Crawford," Father Jose said in accented English, "Miguel is a different man now. He has purpose, hope. He tells everyone that the angels sent him a blind boy who could see more clearly than anyone." Richard smiled, watching Benjamin and Isabella work together to help a newly blind child navigate the garden's tactile features. "I think Miguel has that backwards. Benjamin and Isabella taught all of us how to see." That evening, as the celebration wound down, the extended family that had grown from tragedy gathered in the Crawford mansion's backyard. Miguel had flown in from Mexico and was staying for a week. Rosa, now living in a comfortable assisted living facility funded by the foundation, was teaching Benjamin to make tamales. Maria and Richard were planning the foundation's expansion into other states. "Benjamin," Isabella said as they sat together on a garden swing, "do you ever think about how different things would be if I hadn't found those papers?" Benjamin was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think we would have found our way to the truth eventually. Good friends help each other see clearly, even in the dark." "I'm glad you're my best friend," Isabella said simply. "Me too," Benjamin replied. "And Isabella? I'm glad I can't see what you look like." "Why?" "Because I know you from the inside out. I know your heart first, before anything else. That's the best way to know someone." As the sun set over Dallas, casting long shadows across the Memorial Garden, 2 families who had been broken by tragedy sat together as one family, healed by the simple truth that children sometimes understand better than adults. That love is stronger than guilt, forgiveness is more powerful than blame. And sometimes the greatest sight comes from seeing with your heart. The foundation would go on to help thousands of families. Miguel would eventually move back to Dallas to work full-time with the organization. Benjamin would grow up to become a counselor specializing in childhood trauma. Isabella would become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping families in crisis. But the real victory had already been won in a school library, when a 7-year-old girl decided that truth was more important than comfort, and that her friend's healing mattered more than her own fear. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the biggest miracles. And sometimes, when children lead with their hearts, they can heal wounds that adults never knew how to touch. The end.